So one topic I want to go and talk about in this video is pretty much how to properly recharge a car HVAC system, because a lot of HVAC technicians know this, but a lot of mechanics or technicians, as they should be called, don't actually know this. You know what I mean? And what it is yeah, they'll go and they know they need to use a vacuum pump to vacuum out the system and stuff like that. But what does that mean actually? And I'm going to go and explain. Now, in this case here, I typically use this 3CFM two-stage vacuum pump. Now, the 3CFM, yeah, it's important. This is more important the two-stage part because that means it's able to pull a very deep vacuum. And I know this pump can pull down a very deep vacuum because I have tested it on a Goodman system with an actual professional micron meter. And it was able to pull down that system to 130 microns, which is very impressive for considering what this price of this pump is. So it's actually a pretty good pump when, of course, your HVAC doesn't have any leaks and, you're changing the oil, which is another pertinent topic I should get into. You see here where it says oil, right now it's empty, but you want to keep it where it's oil on the level mark and stuff like that, because then you'll be able to pull down the vacuum properly. Of course, if you run it with no oil, you're A, damage, of course, the pump, and B, you're not going to be able to pull or far enough vacuum. Now, the reason why it's empty right now, because I always change the oil every time I use this pump. So that way I can make sure that it's actually pulling vacuum. If you have dirty oil, it's not going to be able to pull as good of a vacuum where it has clean oil and stuff. So I always just drain it, which the drain plug's on the bottom, and then you can just fill it through there until it's level and then be able to use the pump again, of course. Now, reason why I talk about microns is because the lower that number is, the more and the faster and the better it's going to be able to actually boil off that moisture at room temperature, which is the goal of vacuuming out the system in the first place. You're trying to get all the moisture and stuff like that out of the system. Now, vacuum's not going to suck it out. How it does it is it actually brings the system down to a deep vacuum. And once it does that, it changes the boiling point of liquid and stuff like that. It's not going to boil off the oil, but it'll boil off the moisture and stuff in the lines and stuff. And that's what you're trying to use this thing to actually do, is to boil off the moisture and stuff in the system itself. So you need something that's going to be able to pull down better. There's actually a lot of crap pumps that you'll be lucky to get 300 to 500 microns, let alone this. I was actually quite surprised on this because this pump's only like $130. And the fact that I was able to pull down that system to 130 microns and pretty quickly, I was actually surprised. It actually did a pretty good job. And this is the one I typically use for when doing automotive HVAC work. Now, when you're doing, professional HVAC work and stuff, then you want something between a 5 and 10 CFM, not talking about micron, pump and stuff like that, because you're going to be doing longer line sets and everything else and stuff like that. And you want a pump that's going to be powerful enough, of course, to be able to handle it. If you use too big of a pump, though, however, in doing car HVAC system, you can actually freeze the lines and stuff like that. So that's why I find this pump actually pretty perfect for what it is for doing at least car HVAC work and stuff. It's actually a pretty good pump and a good deal, and I think if you're looking to get one, definitely buy it, of course. Now, here, though, we're going to talk about gauges, and this is just AC manifold gauge set, of course, and stuff like that. Pretty much what I use it for is just to see the low pressure and the high pressure and stuff. This down here, where it pulls the vacuum, that's kind of meaningless to me because, to be honest with you, even $10,000 pumps can't pull a perfect dirty vacuum. They're not going to pull 30 inches of mercury on even a $10,000 pump. And so, yeah, there's scientific AC vacuum pumps and stuff like that can't even do that. So, no. What I do use it for, however, though, and what I was even mentioning in the video, though, is I'll typically, on an unknown AC system that I don't know if it has a leak or not, I'll go ahead and pull the vacuum, I'll turn the pump off, and I'll see if the system will hold the vacuum. That's very important because if the system can't hold the vacuum, you're not going to be able to pull a deep enough vacuum to actually boil off the moisture and stuff. And that's very critical. And that's what a lot of, automotive technicians get wrong and stuff like that. They'll go ahead and just turn the vacuum pump on for 45 minutes and then go and recharge the system and call it a day and stuff like that. No, you want to definitely 1,000% check for leaks, because if you have a leak in the system, you'll be lucky if you're able to get to 1,000 microns, and at 1,000 microns, you're not gonna be able to pull enough vacuum where you're gonna boil off the moisture, and you just kind of defeat the whole purpose of vacuuming the system out in the first place. So that's a very important step. Turn the pump off, pull the vacuum, and if it's not leaking system, it should be able to pull that vacuum in about a minute to a minute and a half. You should be able at full vacuum that pump's capable of, and keep it there. Turn the pump off, walk away for about 20-30 minutes, and it still should be at that same vacuum that it was before you left. If it doesn't, that means your system's good to go. Then turn the pump back on and run it for a full 30, 45 minutes, whatever, and make sure that, of course, burn it off. You don't even need it on that long. In all honesty, a system does not have leak. It should take no more than a few minutes to be able to boil off that moisture and stuff like that. If you want to play it safe, you can run it for a little bit longer, and it'll boil off all the moisture and stuff like that, and then you're ready to go ahead and turn the pump off. Of course, like I said in the last video, go ahead and do your oil first, because you're going to use the vacuum that's in the system that it's holding to pull the oil into the system. And then you can go ahead and do your charge and stuff like that on there. Now, as far as reading these other two needles and what they mean, is you're going to look at the PSI, of course. Now, more important is going to be the high side. The low side is not really that relevant. The high side is what you want to look at, because the high side you want to have between 200 PSI to 250 PSI. That's a good range to be in. And then the low side, if you have it, that should be around 25 to 30 PSI on the low side and stuff. That's a good charge. And that's, more especially if you don't know how much charge you need to put in. So let's just say you're adding Freon and stuff instead of, doing a whole vacuum and, doing a full recharge and stuff. You're just adding it. You want to look at that. And not always all the time. It's always going to be, of course, refrigerant itself. There could be a lot of factor. Your condenser and stuff could be blocked and so forth. Your fans might not be working properly and stuff like that. The trick is you don't want too little pressure and you don't want too much pressure. Too much pressure, you're going to end up destroying stuff. You know what I mean? Too little pressure is not going to get cold enough. So, yeah, that's what I use these gauges for and stuff like that, to look at like what the low side versus the high side and stuff like that. And I could tell, okay, yeah, it's running good. And then, of course, I always look at the coils and stuff, make sure they're not clogged with dirt and everything else, because that will also cause problems and stuff like that too. Make sure the lines are not freezing up and stuff. But that's one of the very important things too to look at when you're reading these gauges and stuff like that. Yeah, they're still useful. Don't get me wrong. A micron, of course, meter that costs you, a couple $100 plus would actually even be better and stuff. But yeah, you can use this gauge, to recharge a car HVAC system. You just gotta know how to read it and then know its limitations and stuff, and know this down here kind of is meterless. If you really want to know exactly how much vacuum's put in, get a micron meter and see how far that pump's actually pulling it down and stuff, and that will give you truly what the vacuum's at and so forth. But hopefully that will help someone pretty much. One of the common mistakes that I used to see all the time in smaller automotive shop that might have not had AC carts or, backyard mechanics or whatever, is when they're charging their system, they go ahead and do maybe everything else properly, but when they're going ahead and getting ready to actually do the charge and stuff, and let's say they're using cans instead of the big tank of refrigerant and stuff like that. Even if you're using the tank of refrigerant, you should do this. But they don't let the air out of the line. And that's very important stuff. You always want to go ahead and let the air out of the line before you do your charge. So when you put your new can on there and opened up the valve on the can, of course this is going to be closed still and you're going to charge from your low side. Don't open this while you're charging, by the way. You want to make sure that you depress this valve right here, and you want to tilt the can kind of sideways so it becomes a liquid form. And you're here, bunch of air rush out in a second or so, and then next thing you know, you're going to see liquid come out of that valve. That's when you know you let the air work out. You stop immediately. Then you go ahead and open up the valve, and then you go ahead and do your charge. And every time you change a can, you make sure you go ahead and depress that valve, let the air out of the line till it becomes, refrigerant, and then go ahead and open up your valve and do your next charge and so forth. And then that way, you're not introducing air back into the system, because air does not make a good replacement for refrigerant. And of course, your system's not going to be as efficient because you put air back into the system. So a very important and crucial step that you do is you want to make sure you don't introduce air back into the system that you're charging. And of course, not all mechanics or technicians know this, because usually you got an AC cart which does all that work for you and stuff like that. And simply you have a high and low side, and all you got to worry about is making sure the machine has oil and refrigerant. And then you go ahead and, of course, on those machines, pretty much automatic, where it'll go ahead and recover what's in there. Then once you recover, then you can vacuum out the system, and then you can put the amount of grams or ounces or whatever of refrigerant you want, and it does it back for you, and the technician doesn't even have to think about it. But when you're doing it the manual way, it's something that you have to be careful of. One last important advice that I can give to people, and I'm talking about DIYers, not necessarily mechanics and technicians, because the majority of them already know better not to use this. But what you'll get is one of these gauges, and typically there's a 16-ounce can on the bottom of this thing, and people will use this thinking that's going to fix their car's HVAC system because it's not blowing cold, and they don't want to take it to a mechanic or technician to actually fix the issue because it costs a lot of money. So they'll go to an auto parts store. I even think like regular stores even sell it, and they'll buy that thinking, oh yeah, that'll fix my AC and get it working and stuff like that. And a lot of times they'll be massively disappointed because it didn't fix the problem, or it'll fix it but it'll only fix it temporary. And what I mean by temporary, usually 2 weeks to a couple months at best. You know what I mean? Because obviously, if you lost Freon, that means you have a leak in your system and stuff like that. And you want to fix that leak before you go ahead and just put more refrigerant into the system and so forth, because it's just going to leak it right back out again. Number two, you're also introducing air, because it's going to introduce air before the refrigerant gets through this line and stuff like that, and there's no way to bleed it out. So that's another problem too and stuff like that. You're putting air into the system, and air doesn't make good refrigerant. And then the other thing too is they put acetals and stuff to help stop leaks, as they claim and stuff like that. Well, most mechanic technician knows what stop leaks in radiators do, and they tend to clog a lot of components like valves, like inside, because there's valves that actually sometime that switches to close off the heater core and open and stuff. It tends to clog that up. It'll clog up the radiator. It'll clog up various other components. It even can cause the antifreeze to gel up and stuff like that too. So that's why I always say avoid stop leaks in fixing your car's engine cooling system as far as your coolant goes, or it's the same thing with your car's HVAC system. Don't put stop leak acetators in there, because it's not going to stop the leak. You'll usually have to find where the leak is, whether it's a hose or typically an O-ring or a valve that's leaking and stuff like that. Go and change it out and fix it properly. And then after you're done fixing it, you want to go and do a proper deep vacuum. And I mean, you want to make sure it can go into a deep vacuum and hold it so you can boil off any moisture and contaminants and stuff that's in the system. And then go and do a proper recharge with the exact, of course, on the label that tells you exactly how much refrigerant that should be in the system and stuff like that. Make sure your pressures and stuff are not too high or too low and so forth. Now, typically, if you got, the point where you got enough refrigerant in your system, but it's still not cooling, usually it's due to a clogged condenser. Maybe your lines are freezing up and stuff like that. There's several other reasons why your HVAC system, besides being just low on refrigerant, is not working. And there's a lot of times when I used to work at a shop, I used to see people bring their cars in, and it was actually massively, and I mean massively, overcharged because people kept adding cans of refrigerant into their system thinking it was going to fix and stuff like that. And when I went ahead and used the AC cart to actually go ahead and recover what was in there, I found it was like sometimes massively overcharged by 2-3 times. So if you see these products, avoid them at all costs. They will not fix your car's HVAC system, and they typically cause more damage than it's worth. And not only that too, they're massively overpriced. you're literally paying about $70 for a can and a gauge. You know what I mean? When you could literally get that same amount of refrigerant for $12, just for the refrigerant only. And I only recommend you only put refrigerant and not acetates and stuff like that. Actually fix the leak or fix the problem with your HVAC system and avoid these cans and AC that you buy at your auto parts store or your super like Walmart or whatever.